and welcome everyone to this Friday morning where we talk about users and users as co-designers. Then let's get started. So today we talk about users and their role in service design or helping to design services. And I will frame that talk or this seminar in two main questions, which I thought are important for public service design. But first, let me introduce myself. I'm a service researcher at the CTF Service Research Center in Karlstads. I have not per se a design background, a design research background. Actually, I would describe myself more as being cross-disciplinary, coming actually from business administration and marketing. But the more and more I explored into issues connected with innovation and also how public services or services in general can be designed and improved, I was interested what is actually the role of citizens or users in that process. And I did my PhD in Australia, but even when I came to Sweden, whenever I talked to public sector organizations and talk about about user involvement, the topic of user involvement, they were really excited and they really said, yeah, that's something we want to do. And I get excited too, because I really think that citizens, public service users have a big role to play in improving, in facilitating public services. But then when it really comes to involving users and implementing that, there we face a lot of challenges, and then often that is not realized. So this is why my research more and more dives and focuses actually on what it takes to involving users in public service design. So today's agenda, first, I would like to present some short arguments of why users should be involved in public service design. So we don't have much time, so we'll only focus on 3 arguments. But please use the chat room in order to reflect, in order to give feedback, in order to maybe present other or write down other arguments. And we can then around 9 o'clock pick them up and discuss these. So criticize me, ask questions, even arguments where you say why users should not be involved in public service design. And then at the second part, then I would like to present like the specific ways how users could be, or how public service design could be more inclusive of users. And then we can again conclude the seminar with some discussions. Okay, but first up, I would like to clarify 3 terms. And the first is what I actually mean with user, because that is a very broad term. Actually, you can see in the public services who uses public services, you can say that's even firms, private firms, and so on and so forth, but also citizens. For this seminar, I would like to keep it simple and really focus on citizens as the user. So because I know like user, a very broad term, again, let's focus on public service users as citizens and those who really use public services. Then there is a term which is automatically connected with that, is the term of user involvement. And that is again a very broad term. And it's like traditionally defined as something users engage in or take over innovation activities. And normally that has been something where the firm, an organization, opens up its innovation process towards users, towards its consumers, towards its customers, and invites them to participate in their innovation process. However, I would like to broaden this term and actually say, like in some cases, users just might really take over innovation activities without the firm involved. And I will illustrate my point very soon. And then finally, because that seminar and the seminar series is focusing on design, and I also label it as public service design, I would like to clarify what I mean with service design, because again, there are many different definitions. And I could spend 10 minutes in order to try to define it from my perspective or many others' perspectives. But to make it simple, I use a very commonly used definition, as also used by, for example, Katharina Wetter-Ettmann. It's a creative, human-centered, iterative approach to service innovation. So it's an approach to service innovation, and I especially would like to highlight the human-centeredness. So, and that in simple term means, well, any design object, be it a service, a system, a product, is meaningless unless it becomes part of people's everyday life, people's experience. And from that perspective, it becomes very much clear that you need to start with understanding user needs, the user experience, in order to design a public service, for example. All right. So now let's get started with this first question. So why should users be involved in public service design? And again, I present 3 arguments here within a short time frame, but please again use the chat room to share your experiences, your thought around this question, and we can pick that up later. All right, first argument I would say is users are a source of innovation. Very simple, and that is not something new. That has been explored since the 1980s when Eric von Hippel wrote the book where he explored what are actually sources of innovation within economies. And he found that actually users, he, however, also defined users as firms, as clients from a business-to-business settings. For example, medical staff in a hospital are highly innovative. They're often even pioneers in innovation. And if you think like classic examples, the first mountain bike was developed by users. And the reason for that is users are actually, when they use products and services, they develop or have specific needs. And based on those needs, they change what they currently have. But even more, they have like the motivation and to not only innovate, but even share their innovations for free. And that led to, over the years, to almost a paradigm shift in the innovation literature from this producer-centric paradigm, where it's like innovation was something really driven by firms, towards like a more user or open innovation paradigm. So that was over the years framed more and more as such, because it was noted that within like countries like Sweden, you have around 5 to 10% of the general populations are on a regular basis innovating and even share the innovations for free. And from that, it's actually surprising that we don't use that innovation source, for example, within public service settings. So the second argument links directly to the first one. Users often innovate before firms do. So in many cases, it was found that radical innovations have first been developed by users. So it's actually not firms who drive radical new innovations. They commercialize it as such, but it's really those who have the needs before the trend of the market who are actually designing and developing new solutions. And then firms pick up on that and commercialize it and diffuse it, because often users do not have these skills. And as to provide you an example, look at patient innovation, which is a big platform. I provided a link there, where patients actually, based on their needs, develop solutions which they think work for them, but where they especially have no producer involved. That means they have specific needs, but no producer who helps them to address that need. So no hospital, no medical healthcare provider who helps them to address the need. So they develop their own solutions, but they share it also for free via this platform. And that is like an opportunity when you look at Agenda 2030, where it can really help to address like good health and well-being by also including users as a source of innovation. So, and there are many other examples, which is like where users innovate, again, with no producer involved. And then the third argument is, well, users have access to use knowledge. And then what I would claim is one of the most convincing and strongest arguments. And there's been a lot of research done around this, including my own research, where it's like shown that use knowledge, so there's like users' experiences and their needs, that's sticky knowledge. So when you do as a firm or an organization do market research and try to explore user needs, for example, by doing focus groups or interviews or surveys, you will not get access to this specific knowledge you want to tap in, user needs, user experiences. But this is only or most effective if you allow users to be actively part of your design or innovation process. So therefore, users have access to this very specific use knowledge, and that could be their biggest contribution to a service design process. However, in many cases, users generated ideas are also more novel, more original, because they allow or they provide a different perspective to, for example, an underlying problem. And this becomes more and more complex or more and more important today, because users think about are not interacting or operating with one specific firm only, but are actually nowadays more and more connected. Think about how citizens create value, how they try to achieve their goals. They do not interact with a single healthcare provider or other public service organization, but they, and especially enabled through digital technology, they integrate resources from many different sources. So from that, we really need to get access to the user's activity system, and that is really difficult if you use market research techniques or similar. So there you should really try to get access to the user and try to involve the users into especially the early stages of your design process. So I think this picture illustrates what happens if you do not understand the user experience. Well, then you and traditionally service design or service development was something which was the responsibility of in-house developers. And again, they were informed by market research or insights into customer needs or user needs in order to develop a new product or service. If you approach it that way, you run risk that the user experience and therefore also the way how users use a service is completely different. So there is the challenge understanding the system surrounding user activities. And so my third argument is you only get access to that specific knowledge if you have users actively involved in your design or development process. And so taking that one further and reflecting on the other arguments is then really is it really design experts who should be in charge of developing new services, or should actually have end users, citizens, have a more active role in that process? All right, I open up the discussion to the forum, and everyone who wants to share other arguments or challenge me or have questions, please, the floor is yours.
Should we take some of the who has been writing in the chat about Ulrika has written, saw the morning news today, a man who, passionate fisherman, ended up in a wheelchair after an accident, designed a fishing boat especially for persons in wheelchairs. The users as the designers. That's a good example, isn't it?
Exactly. So they that's these kind of things that illustrate that users are actually innovating, but they have very specific needs, and based on their specific needs, they start developing new solutions. But the interesting thing is they are not very often picked up by organizations. These users, they're often not part of their design. So they innovate in isolation. And then when they have platforms like patient innovation, they even share the innovations for free. So that means users do not want to have like ownership even of the innovations, but they're actually happy to share them with others and would be happy if organizations take their innovation further to improve it, for example, move it beyond the prototype, make it more safer, which, for example, in healthcare is really important.
I've been writing a reflection in the chat, Jakob, and it's more about user involvement in some kind of policy design. And my question was, how do you think about user involvement versus the parliamentary democracy? When design policies, can they be challenged, or do you see it as widening the perspective of the democracy? I mean, if you understand my question, how do you reflect on that?
I will present a little bit on the policy level later, but do you mean like that, for example, democratizing innovation? Is that what?
I mean, if you are thinking about if we have this parliamentary democracy where you vote on what policies you might think the society should focus on, and then you have another possibility to in some kind change that kind of policies by being a user involvement in the policy processes that might collide sometimes, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, that's yeah. However, there have been studies like when we drill it down, to really on the clash. For example, when we take innovation, how innovation is nowadays like integrated in our society versus the role of end users, of consumers. There have been even studies arguing that this can be complementary. They can work in tandem with each other. They do not conflict with each other so much as we think. And for example, to provide an example like intellectual property. So normally when a firm develops a new radical innovation, it has the right to protect the innovation. Users don't want that, or it even restricts users. But then these studies claim, yeah, well, that can still be complementary, because again, user innovations are for free, and there should be other ways to actually incentivize or protect users' innovation and how firms use it. So it doesn't need to be this radical way. So we have to really rethink the way how that is framed, and I will present that very briefly in the how question, what policy can do in order to allow users to be part of like a country's innovation system or infrastructure, so to say.
Let's see more in the chat. We have Stefan is writing, what if public services are the way to implement citizens' rights? What becomes of user involvement then?
Yeah, but like when it comes to citizens' rights, But is that still conflicting, Stefan, or is that like again? I think there a user should have a say or can contribute with their perspective or knowledge.
Maybe you can come in, Stefan, and make a clarification.
Yeah, that's the question, right? So if we, it goes along the lines of Kalle also. If we decided that we have the right to medical healthcare, for example, that's something completely different than a market kind of facing way of thinking about why we have healthcare, right? So user involvement then maybe is something different than listening, driving user innovation or whatever. So it's maybe a different approach to understanding how we involve users and the platforms we build, for example, if we have user innovations. So it's more of the difference between something that is a right, I have the right to medical treatment, or I can get medical treatment. And the way that changes the role of the user. If there at all are users, then that's also a question, but we can skip that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I will also come back to that later, because one limitation of user involvement, as I will present later, is also like when you call for user participation or involvement, then you might actually only tap into those who are highly motivated. What means that, or that means that others might get pushed further out of the system, which is, when it comes to public service provision, a big issue. So there are things which we need to be careful about. Yes.
We have another question from Gustav here. Why do users innovate? Is it solely on the basis of them needing a solution that is not available, or are there more factors, education, different fields of work, etc.?
Yeah, there are other motivational drivers which I will present also in the second part. Because yes, it is sometimes really because you have a unsolved need which you face, and therefore you start playing around and develop things further. But then you might also have you after some status or reputation, you want to generate new knowledge or connect with others. So, or you're highly engaged with an organization or with a specific topic, and then you participate. But I will also come back to that. But this is a very the motivational drive, a very important question. Yeah,
we have some kind of reflection from Thomas as well. Maybe Thomas, you will come in and I'm not really sure what you are asking, but maybe you can clarify it a bit.
I'll see, I don't have my earphones in, but I'm thinking, as I remember studying a little bit on von Hippel and user innovations, users can always be involved in an innovation process, but we need to understand that there are different types of users. Some go all the way to being sort of creating solutions and being innovative. But not all of us. Sort of when we go in and use a service as a user, sometimes we are just sort of the ordinary user, and we use that service maybe 1 or 2 times. Sometimes we are more advanced in using the service, so we actually know more about how the service works, or as much as the service provider. So we are sort of in an advanced stage and can be more involved in how this service develops or innovates, changes for the future. And sometimes we go all the way to actually try and create solutions for ourselves. So that's what I wanted Jakob to reflect upon. Sort of, are there different type of users, and do we need different ways to involve them in these different stages, thinking they are actually not the same?
Exactly. Also something. Sorry, I on the how question is precisely, and this I think is in the public sector even more so than in the private sector. You have a super wide range of different users. And again, when we only put it on citizens, you have so many different types of users. But then in the public sector, you even have firms and you have many other stakeholders who are actually also users. You can also consider them as taking a role in the innovation process. So you need to think about like who do you actually involve in what form. And I absolutely agree with you. Some users don't have the capability, but also not the interest or motivation to be part of improving services or contributing to the service innovation. They don't see themselves part of the system. And that is also something really important to consider, because as we'll present later on, if you only focus on, for example, self-selection procedures, yeah, well, then you might push out those further and exclude them even further from seeing themselves part of the system. And that can have very many unintended consequences. So while there are good arguments why users can take part of an innovation process, it's not a clear cut. And as I said, like those who regularly innovate, they represent 5 to 10% of a country. Like when you take, they call it now consumers rather than users. But that's like Sweden, that's 500,000 people. So they can classify it as user innovators on a citizen level. So there are large-scale studies done within Europe and US and UK, and they found that it's quite consistent.
And what about this question from Jonas? What about the interest to involve users, public sectors versus private sector? Have you seen difference there?
Yes, like, and one of the biggest differences, like in the level of engagement. While the private sector is really good at building like a community of highly engaged users. And then again, it's about really private interests, or like private needs they address. It's like it's much more difficult in the public sector, where often, is there a highly engaged patient? Yeah, there can be, but there you cannot focus on engagement as a driver necessarily, because again, then you only tap to those users who are already highly like part of the system, rather than those who actually have maybe the biggest needs for a service to be improved, or their needs to be heard in order to improve a public service.
Perfect, thank you. Maybe we should go on to the second part of your, where we have the answer of all our questions.
Exactly. So there, I hope that I can clarify some points. So we have now talked a little bit about different arguments, but so what about the how question, and how can public service design be more inclusive of users? And I would like to present that starting from a policy level, and then go really down to a project level, where it is about the decision, should we involve users, and how can that be achieved? And what is happening on the policy level, and there is, especially when you look at innovation policy, there is like still like what is very strongly driving innovation policies is like a producer-centric approach. So that means resources required, be it funding, be it other types of resources, they go to firms and research institutes rather than actually citizens. And like one example to illustrate that is food waste in Sweden. And we did an analysis there and really said, okay, food waste in Sweden is a big issue. But like the biggest problem of food waste actually happens on the consumer levels. Like the largest amount of food waste in Sweden is happening in households. Okay, but when we did, like, we looked at the action plan, which has been developed in order to address Agenda 2030 goal. It's SDG 12.3, and it calls for reducing food loss and food waste within the system. And then so we analyzed, like, what were the action plan, the strategies in order how to achieve that. And what we found is, like, the majority of the focus is on food producers and food suppliers. But consumers so households, they are not considered. Yeah, there are information campaigns and so on and so forth. But that's really based on a logic or like a mindset that firms innovate and consumers adopt. And with food waste, that can be a problem, because the underlying issues leading to food waste in households, that's deeply entangled in our everyday life. And food producers, suppliers might not even have the motivation to reduce food waste on the consumer level. And in fact, over the years, food waste became much more reduced on the production supply chain. It becomes much more effective, but this remains a large issue, almost 70% now on the consumer level. And so that's where policy really needs to change something, because otherwise, yeah, we run risk that that consumers, again, their needs and their perspectives are not heard. And there has actually recently been a study where they interviewed decision makers when it comes to, for example, innovation funding. And they found, like, only 2.7% mention users as innovators. So that showcases the focus is on, yeah, well, firms innovate or research institutions innovate, and yeah, users, consumers adopt. So that's this producer-centric paradigm, which is very present in innovation policy. So user innovations are actually underestimated. And that's maybe why also at the beginning with my three arguments were very normative or very radical towards users need to be involved without asking too many questions behind it. But of course, you're right, there need to be questions asked behind it and why it is that way. But again, it's like trying to break that paradigm of having firms innovating or organization innovating and consumer taking that more passive role. However, there are many examples of changes and how policy can support users to be part of an innovation process. So for example, examples include open data and how you can provide users with relevant information to support them in their activities. Back in the days, like the US government launched something, the Nations of Makers, so really giving nationwide users like access to maker spaces, which has also been a Swedish study which showed that, like, that can be highly effective in improving products and services. Going more local, for example, Karlstads University, which I'm part of, started a few years back open courses where everyone can participate. So you don't need to, you can just drop in if you want. And it's based on topics like IT and management. So giving you the tools, the knowledge, what is required to innovate, to solve problems. And then also staying local, like the Digital Well Arena and Paper Province did the same. It's like having innovation support, like small scale grants, which are easy, accessible, where citizens, when they have like certain things they want to explore further, they can apply for, and using that. So these examples show that we are moving towards a more inclusive society. And then it's like what is done like before this, that's almost a year ago now, like initiatives like set again collaboratively like Hack the Crisis, based on the COVID crisis, where everyone was invited to develop new possible solutions around how we can tackle like the issues coming with the Corona crisis. And that's also like being launched or supported from the top down, the government, in order to facilitate this. So this again allows people to participate, share, and innovate. And there were around 4,000 participants taking part, that firms, citizens, and so on and so forth, researchers. So there are policies. Policy plays a big role in actually opening up innovation to everyone within a society, within an economy. But then when we drill down to the project level, like let's say an organization decides to be open and involve users, then it's really about shifting design activities to users. So in order like keep going away from this mindset, we innovate and users use or adopt and so on and so forth. It's really giving them the tools and them the platform to share their ideas. But like that's unfortunately doesn't work, but it's like the thing, and there are many platforms, and providing one example is like, think about Nike ID, allowing customers to customize their products. So there is like, you try not to address each customer need, but you just outsource the development process to customers. So this was most like this traditional way to providing toolkits to consumers. But then there are even initiatives like OpenIDEO, where like a platform was built where different users can just participate and collaboratively develop their ideas. But that platform was actually quite smartly developed, because they were not based on a mindset like build it and they will come, but it was much more. They developed like a network, and based on well, you don't need to always contribute ideas, but even when you get feedback, you get recognition. So it built a community over the years around different people collaborating and giving them actually something back. And this is, I think, the main challenge on a project level, that you cannot use that mindset, well, we built a platform and people will come and people will participate. But you need to actually really think what are the user motivations behind their innovation activities. And that goes back to some questions asked. So, well, one is you have like an unaddressed need, which you want to address. Well, that is definitely a strong motivational driver. However, there are other motivations, and they could, for example, be simple the enjoyment to participate in these activities, or connecting with others, or gaining new knowledge about an underlying issue or field, or you want to gain a specific status or reputation within your community. So these are also very strong drivers why users participate in innovation activities. And it's important for firms to understand this. What have been shown not being effective are these extrinsic drivers, such financial rewards. Let's give users some vouchers. That is not effective, because it might lead to some users being contributing, but their contributions are actually not as innovative as, for example, when it's based on intrinsic drivers. And then you have the issue about self-selection. So many of these platforms and initiatives are based on users self-selecting themselves. And my own research showcases what happens if you have users self-selecting themselves. And so what I did during my PhD, I set up a study with our academic libraries. And we said, hey, let's reach out to our users and let's see what they have to contribute to. For example, redevelop how a library should be used and library services should be used. So all we did, we called for participation. Everyone is invited to come and join. And so we did that, like used all kind of different forums to call for user participation. And I did like a pre-screening test where I asked users about, well, and especially one measure here, what are your innovation-related benefits? So what are your motivational driver why you participate? And the majority of them, and we had 2 studies, so 2 different libraries where we did that, is because they had very strong needs. And use that or saw that initiative, their participation as an opportunity to get their needs heard, to really develop solutions based on their individual needs. And then when they participated within co-design groups, then we had sometimes users with clashing needs. And that's where the effect of self-selection really became obvious, because suddenly you have users who have not compatible needs. And then you have actually conflicts, very, very strong conflicts. And we talking on issues like library service development, not like even where you might have even stronger needs like social services or healthcare. So again, you have very strong needs if you use, or like when you use self-selection procedures. And that leads automatically to the question, so who should be involved? And if you classify user in terms of the level of engagement or motivation, then you can have like extreme users, those who are highly engaged and highly motivated, but you can also have extreme users on the other end of the spectrum. And then you can have the general user. But what the question I would really like to open is, yeah, well, if you use self-selection procedure, you tap into that one type of user. But what happens about those? And what is actually happening, or the voice, the needs of those users, which are even more difficult to express. And the issue or the risk you might run into when you only use self-selection, highly motivated users who contribute with their specific needs. What about the others who are actually not engaged at all and are not motivated, don't see themselves part of the system? Do you actually push them further out of the system and make that like public service provision or public service as something very, very exclusive to some user groups? So that is something what needs to be considered. And then it's also that question becomes even more important when you consider like co-design as a tool, as a method in service design is actually something which allows for example, vulnerable users or users who would not see themselves as part of a system or do not have the skills to become actors or give them agency and give them knowledge and actually enable them to become co-designers per se or contributors per se. So based on that, we more recently published an article where we try and where that study was also done in Australia, where we try to tap actually and purposely activate and engage those vulnerable user groups. And what we found is what the key to lies then in recruitment, and actually to not use self-selection procedures, but really working on the front end and plan very carefully who should be involved, and really ask who is the user participate in, and use, for example, local networks to tap into those users who do not see themselves part and do not see their responsibility, or are not interested, not motivated in contributing to public service design. And then sensitize them. That means to really inform, prepare, and activate those users. And then you can involve them into the process, because then they suddenly find you enable them, and then they see themselves as part, and they actually contribute very, very interesting insights. And this is also where I think the role of a service designer is then really to enable, during facilitation, those users to contribute to new outcomes, and even give them maybe the agency, ability, the capacity to drive change within their local networks, within their niche, within their household. So that's like a different approach, which moves away from this self-selection and highly engaged users. And yeah. All right. And based on that, I say thank you. And again, I open up for any discussions, reflections you might have.
Thank you very much, Jakob. And let's see about if we have something. Please write in the chat your questions. And before, when people are trying to write, I will highlight a question that I actually missed in your last in stage 1 of your presentation, and that was from Susanne. And the question was, do you think that calling people users of services frames our thinking of in a certain way?
That could totally be possible. Yes, I agree. Like the term user is therefore also I tried at the beginning to but like I don't know a better term, and this is where the innovation literature changed a little bit and calls it now household, but then they even like their worst terms, like called consumer innovators, and I think that really doesn't work, because are we actually consumers or are we users? So this, like, I agree that the term user is maybe not the best one to use here.
Yeah, thank you. And we have a question from Sara Näslund. I have a feeling there are insecurities as to how we in public sector, healthcare in particular, are legally allowed to involve users in innovation projects. A big obstacle, in my opinion. Thoughts on this? Is there a need for guidelines, or do they actually already exist?
That I totally agree with. It is very, very difficult because it's a sensitive topic, and for example, just from a organization's perspective, it's very difficult to, for example, do some background information gathering on who, for example, patients are who participate, because then suddenly, so like nowadays and this is what I also see, like on the policy level, you need to be like, there need to be many things done in order to make it easier to operate on a open, like having an open or collaborative innovation process happening. And then of course you have this trade-off, like there are always risks involved with, for example, opening up or having policies which support the one might create risk for the others. And this is, I think this is the biggest challenge to move forward. Like, it's maybe not the organizations themselves. They really want to be open to user involvement. They want to really be inclusive of users, but there are like this higher level, for example, policies which restrict that.
Yes, perfect. And we have two questions that might be answered in one answer, I think. And one is from Marika. Have you been able to point who the non-engaged users normally are in society? Younger, non-academics, etc. And another question that's actually from me, and that it's how do companies tackle this question with what you call non-engaged users? Do they involve the extreme non-engaged users, and if so, how do they manage to do that?
Like, well, I would say in a private setting, I would tap into extreme users on those who are highly engaged, because that works, because they are constantly engaged in that topic. They give you feedback, they collaborate with you, and that's normally a very, very large user base. You don't need to necessarily focus on those who are not seeing themselves part of your system, but in a public sector, this is really, really important. I cannot say who those non-engaged users are. It depends on the setting. But we, for example, did it in terms of alcohol education, and for doing that specifically for parents. That means how do parents inform their children about the risk of alcohol, because they play a big role. Well, in our case, there were those who had alcohol problems, and those we wanted to tap into. How did we get access to them? Yeah, well, we went to local pubs, and we within local communities try to identify and activate those people. And it was very resource intensive, but it worked.
Okay. And another question of this in this part of the discussion, I think, from Johanna, could there be a risk of combining self-selection users and low-engaged users in co-design activities together? Highly motivated users might take over? Yes,
absolutely. And this is also, especially when you have very strong needs, you take that, so you have to see that you don't give up your time to contribute something and want nothing back. As you want to have something back. So when you're an extreme user, you try to make your needs heard if you have them. Of course, you see it as an opportunity to change things for yourself.
And we have some questions from Stefan. And one is, how would you say that your last model is different from co-design or cooperative design? And
I think that is very much co-design, Stefan. This is how yeah, that's how co-design should be, and I think that co-design should be the process which recognizes that there is not like just what I want to emphasize with that model is, or with that framework or with this process, is that you not just facilitate co-design teams, but that there's especially the front end of it where you the selection and the preparation, and it is based on those authors you name here. That this is essential of it, and it's often overlooked. It's about let's involve users, build the platform, and they will come, and let them self-select without asking too much the question, who is actually participating? I see this very often, like not actually having any background information on who is actually part of the design process. And that I really want to emphasize that this is super important.
Thank you. And another question from Susan, and that is, how do we avoid self-selection when using digital platforms as user innovation infrastructure?
Yeah, and that's exactly the thing. Like when you have digital platforms, it's even what can be worse with it is like that only those who have access to digital technology and are digital affine and comfortable with that come and join. So it's I mean, it's great because everyone can participate, but you need to, I would use personal or really targeted selection procedures where I try to access those I want to have involved. But I'm not like I have no, like this is something we are currently working on and asking ourselves, how can we actually use digital technology to engage those who are not engaged? We see that even more difficult. We try that currently within the healthcare setting. We find that really challenging. So at that stage, I'm not convinced that digital technology can actually help with that. Certainly there's a way, but we haven't found a good solution to that yet, especially in a public service setting.
And we have one interesting question here from Gustav, I think. He writes, social hedonistic cognitive personal values seems a bit like carrots. What are the sticks of the user innovation?
Yeah. Why is this question? I need to read it.
It's a bit up, but it's like he also wrote a little bit later down that just as we're thinking, I guess,
here.
Innovation or die perspective from private companies seems more of a stick kind of a thinking.
What are the sticks?
So might we have some sticks in the public user involvement to force people to innovate with this? Is it possible?
I don't think it's possible to force people to innovate. But yeah, what are the sticks?
What do you think, Gustav? Do you have any comments on that? Because I think it's a relevant question, but I might not see how that would be possible.
I think I was thinking about this fisherman story from earlier. Like he, in a way, didn't have a choice. I think he just wanted to return to his own way of life. And I think that, of course, you can perceive that as gaining value or being motivated in that way, but it's also like a big pressure. I don't know. I'm new to this way of thinking, so.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I think that what you write about the innovate or die perspective from private companies might the public sector might take that more serious and think that as well, that if the public sectors don't innovate with the users, there might be a very tough future for them, maybe.
With the example I presented earlier with the healthcare and the platform patient innovation, there is actually an article behind it. Pietro Oliveira with colleagues developed it, and they argue around that. Like I say, well, what is the risk when patients don't innovate their solutions, which are currently not available to them? Well, it's high risk that their innovation or their solution is not working properly. But if they don't have like a solution, it can even get worse for them, and they might even die, because some of them develop solutions based on very serious disease, but a very rare disease they have, and nothing is available in the market. So they develop something which kind of works for them. It's kind of an early prototype. So they are forced in some way to develop a solution, and so they really are happy to have like a platform where they can share and get some feedback and insights from others in their community, because it's sometimes too small in a scale for a producer to commercialize it. So that's also an issue to consider.
Thank you. And do you have any more interesting questions in the chat? So please write them. Otherwise, I think it might be time for wrap it up. But we have on something from Ulrika here at last. But maybe Ulrika, you would like to ask the question yourself, and maybe go a bit deeper with the question.
Just a reflection, but we've seen a lot of this in the politics settings, that the more shy users been more talkative and participant more in these digital settings than before. Now we've seen that during this pandemic, it's like a trend. Just a reflection.
And I tend to agree with that, because we can just reflect on our own experience. We all became, because we had to, more digitally affine, because we kind of forced to. It's our only way to connect and interact in many ways. So that can actually create an opportunity also.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much. I think we might wrap it up here, and thank you a lot, Jakob, for this presentation and this discussion. It was very interesting and very good interaction with the audience, I think. And thank you all for all your questions and reflections in the chat and